Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. Hope you're having a great day as we continue to celebrate so many amazing people across this great state of Mississippi who are working so hard to make this such a great place to live, work, and play. Listen, we have a really important show today because we're going to give you the latest on the insurance situation, homeowner and business insurance situation here in Mississippi, especially coastal Mississippi. But it's not just a coastal Mississippi issue, especially when we're talking about the National Federal Flood Insurance Program. So I've invited my friend Frank Bordeaux. He, as you remember him well, I'm sure. He's the past chairman of the Mississippi GOP. He's an insurance executive here in Mississippi, and he's a regular on the show. We have deep conversations about insurance. But because we had a really active hurricane season, and because he's fresh back from talking to some of the reinsurers, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. We're in a good position today to talk about what's the latest. But before we go any further, let me welcome Frank Bordeaux back to the Ricky Matthews Show. Frank, how you doing, my friend?
I'm good. How are you doing, Ricky? I appreciate you having me on.
I'm good. I'm doing really good. Listen, how does it feel to take a deep breath after kind of passing the chairmanship of the GOP to someone else?
Look, it was good time, and in the middle of that, as soon as I came home, my wife and I were taking care of my father, who recently, unfortunately, passed away, and then we were going through the Gallagher acquisition, and so just kind of learning the new firm and the unbelievable resources that they have both here in the United States, but also in Europe. And so it's been very busy, and it was very good timing to step away.
I was sorry to hear about the death of your father. God bless you and your family. I know that's never a good thing. So I really, really hate to hear that news. So why don't we do this, Frank? Before we get started, why don't you give them a sense of what you do in your day job?
So my day job is, obviously I sell and procure insurance for various entities, whether they're public or private, not just here on the coast, but throughout the state and the nation. And so, but really right now it's been a very difficult market for the last several years. So we spend a lot of hours early in the morning to late at night working on both domestic markets and foreign markets to entertain risk here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast and beyond. And so lately the last few years it's been a full-time job.
I know it has been, and one of the benefits of having you so deep into this is you are constantly thinking about what can we do to improve the situation? How do we best respond to it? Because as you and I have had many conversations about, the insurance component of economic development, no matter where that is taking place, is so critical to the overall situation, whether we're talking about building affordable housing or whether we're talking about building businesses along the coast, wherever it might be. The insurance component is always so critical, and you've been deep in it for a number of years. And just to kind of help people, when I mentioned you had just got back from talking to the reinsurers, that was a significant meeting you just returned from, isn't it?
Yes, we go to London, and the past several years we've been going to London more often as they've been participating more on our program. But our domestic markets are very important as well, whether it's going to Connecticut or Atlanta, meeting with domestic markets. Bermuda is a big player, obviously, in where we live on the catastrophic side of insurance. And so it's building those relationships are extremely important. And just listening to what those folks say, they're so in tune to their risk. It's really amazing and impressive to see how in tune a guy in London is to what's going on in Mississippi, and not just how the risk is responding, but legislation that we may be passing or programs that we may be working on to better our risk. So they're go
ahead. Say it again.
They're very in tune to what goes on. It's amazing.
I'm sure they are. The reinsurance companies is all about the insurance that insurance companies get. And so it's not usually, as you and I have talked about many times in the past, it's not local decisions, state decisions, in many cases, even national decisions that are getting made. It's the global markets that are affecting how that works. Give people just a sense of how those dots connect.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you're talking to these folks over there. Here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, we don't think about Hurricane Debbie that went through the United States, caused very little damage, sat over Canada and had a huge $9 billion loss, creating a 350% loss ratio for these carriers that they didn't anticipate those claims. You have massive flooding all year long in Europe that wasn't anticipated. Helena is going to end up being much bigger than what the models projected. Due to the inland flooding that happened in North Carolina. Milton's going to be much smaller than what they predicted. And then you had 2 Cat 5s hit the Philippines that nobody in America talked about in 6 weeks. And so that was, and then one that really surprised me, so many of these reinsurers were on risk in New Caledonia, a small island, and they had riots that caused over $1 billion of losses that they obviously didn't anticipate. And so it is well beyond just what happens, here in Mississippi. And when they start throwing out these big numbers, it kind of opens your eyes that they're on a whole lot more risk than what we are. And then you have the emerging Asian market that is buying insurance for the first time for most of these folks. And so that shrinks a little bit of the capacity as well.
Yeah, Josh Morganman, who's the top hurricane chaser in the world, is living part of the time in Mississippi. He actually built a house in Bay St. Louis, and he did the most number of chases this year than he's ever done in his career. To Philippines, to I think even Japan, and he's just been all over the world. One of the things that comes out in the conversations with Josh when he's on my show is what he's learning about the value of fortification. I mean, especially in places like Japan, it's unbelievable how fortified they are and how they can not only minimize the insurance risk, but also minimize the disruption that occurs after a storm. You see that around the world. So this notion that when we push for fortification, that's a global conversation that's taking place, isn't it?
It is a global conversation. And, you and I have spoken about fortification. I know the insurance commissioner, as well as the wind pool board, has had various conversations about fortification, looking at what our neighbors in Alabama have done and done it very successfully. North Carolina's doing a lot of it. And these are statewide programs that they're rolling out. You're seeing it happen in Louisiana with their new insurance commissioner. Really, Louisiana has invested a lot of money into fortification. Our legislators, led by our coast delegation, appropriated $5 million towards a mitigation program to the Department of Insurance last year. I'm hopeful that there's more money that's able to go towards that mitigation program. And the insurance commissioner wants to see that go statewide, which I don't disagree with. I do believe that folks on the coast who've passed better building codes and have an immediate need, hopefully they'll be able to take advantage of those mitigation programs first.
Well, so there is a homeowner insurance crisis in America. You don't have to search much to be able to read stories from really all over, not just America. As you mentioned, Canada has had their share of issues. There's a lot of conversations that are happening about solutions. The reality is, if we just look at our own Facebook, groups that we're involved in, you see people who complain about their rising insurance costs. You read the Sun Herald, you see stories about people who let their flood insurance lapse. They lost their grandfathering, and then they came back with full rate. We can remind people why that's so important, but that's an attribute of the new Risk Rating 2.0 program that the National Flood Insurance Program rolled out. But these things are making home ownership more unaffordable. In fact, in some cases, people are having to sell their homes and move inland or maybe move to another state in some cases. But we can't really begin to understand what the solutions are going to be until we have a full understanding of what the problem is today. And it is a significant problem. And it's going to take work across, it's going to take focused work. I'm hoping with the Trump administration that we can have some more discussions, maybe some quick fixes that can happen on the National Flood Insurance Program, maybe some other things that can be put into place. But clearly on the national stage, there's a huge debate, and I think there's a lot of confusion about coastal areas and whether it's rich people that live on coastal areas or whether it's workers that live on coastal areas. But Frank, when you talk about the challenge as it exists today, How do you tell people about? I'm not talking about solutions, but just what is the challenge?
The challenge is capacity and where that capacity is going to come from. And what we're seeing in the marketplace, and you and I spoke about this last time we met, and it's actually coming to fruition, is here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast and on coastal areas. We're seeing the same thing we've seen really since Katrina. A very difficult market, limited markets, very few admitted markets or standard carriers that are willing to write. But then you go north of us, and you're starting to see that north of us. And that's what's going to be very difficult for Mississippians north of the coast, is to be able to.
That's a troubling trend. So more people will be joining the agony that we've been dealing with for many years. That's not a good thing. When we come back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation with Frank Bordeaux, and we'll paint the picture of how complicated the problem is. And then we'll talk about what some of the possible solutions might be. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. I have Frank Bordeaux with me. He's an insurance executive, really an expert when it comes to insurance. He's fresh back, in fact, from London, where he met with reinsurers and has a pretty good sense of what the current challenges are. But when we went to break, though, he was mentioning that some of the issues that we faced here in coastal Mississippi from a homeowner's point of view, rising both from a flood insurance program and also in terms of comprehensive coverage for our homes, that's actually spreading inland. And that's really kind of new news to me. That's not a good trend. I'll let you finish your thoughts on that.
Yeah, as we saw this past hurricane cycle, those that were on the coast really performed quite well from a modeling standpoint. It was those inland that did not perform well. And you're seeing that more often. And so the insurance market's responding to that. We're actually seeing a softening in the market here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, but as it relates to commercial properties, the residentials haven't followed yet. But I do believe you're going to see a stabilization. But what we're going to see is north of us, we're going to continue these straight line wind events that are affecting north of us are really affecting the insurance market. So the first time in ever, these guys are seeing, percentage deductibles on their wind, which we've lived with for a very long time. But you're also seeing rate increases. You're seeing less coverage. You're seeing larger all other peril deductibles. And so it speaks to what coastal America has done from a hardening standpoint. And I think the insurance market's responding to that in a positive manner for best of class risk along the coast. But we have to continue north of us as a state to do some strengthening.
It's amazing. So you look at the most recent events. For example, obviously going into Tennessee and South Carolina, the damage in North Carolina, all of that ends up getting factored into models, and they start saying, okay, we're going to weigh the risk, beyond the coastal areas, and that's what you're seeing clearly, isn't it?
Yeah, there's no question. You're seeing these straight line events that are causing multi-million-dollar losses. And they're not few and far between. They're happening on a more regular basis. Rolling Fork's a great example. I mean, that was a large event that happened in Rolling Fork, caused a lot of damage. And we've seen freezes in North Mississippi that's caused a lot of damage, insured losses. And so the coast looks really good from a loss ratio standpoint. If you look at Mississippi Gulf Coast, from a loss ratio standpoint, we're very, very attractive. And so I think you're going to see the trend continue to go north of us of fewer and fewer admitted and standard markets, and E&S is going to play more of a role. I think Mississippi's in a much better position than some of our neighboring states, especially Louisiana. They're having serious issues.
Yeah, so they've been hit numerous times. We've been lucky in Mississippi in terms of the big hit. And as a result of that, we've been able to kind of sustain a wind pool that is pretty darn healthy when you compare it, especially to other states. And we'll repeat some of that and when we get to that point in the conversation here shortly. But I wanted to share a couple of things. I went to the internet, did some research. I looked at X and I looked at some other social media, and then of course the internet specifically. I just wanted to kind of get a cross section of what various people are saying. And here's one insurance executive who said that property along the Gulf and Southern Atlantic coast will become nearly uninsurable at rates affordable to most property owners within the next few years. And that is a looming economic and political crisis with no easy fix. So that's a strong statement, but it depends on where you live. You have a stronger perception of why that statement probably may be true. Here's another one, and this speaks to the unrealistic views that some have about us who live on the coast. And this is actually a really important one. This guy says we should pay homeowners to move. Subsidizing insurance in coastal hurricane-prone areas makes no sense. We wouldn't be encouraging people to live there. Pay them to move inland. How unrealistic is that? Here's another one. Why are taxpayers responsible for private coastal landowners? If you buy the Gulf, there is hurricane risk. If you can't afford the insurance or can't self-insure, maybe live somewhere else. Taxpayers shouldn't be on the hook because someone wants to live on the beach. Well, as we will learn as we continue through these conversations, it's not that easy. Here is a section of a report that John Stossel did. You'll recognize some of the voices. Obviously, Senator John Kennedy is one of the first voices. I'm going to play this on my phone through my mic. I hope you can hear it well, but it really makes an important point about people who live on the beach, who live on the coast are not all rich in second homes. This is the important point we want to make. But listen to how John Kennedy starts this out.
Going to shut down the National Flood Insurance Program?
Louisiana Senator John Kennedy is upset.
What planet did we just parachute in from?
Upset because Senator Rand Paul wants to limit government flood insurance. He says it
shouldn't be for rich people and shouldn't be for their vacation home or their beach homes.
It shouldn't be. It's reckless that government insures beach houses. As I reported years ago, it encourages idiots like me to do foolish things like building this beach house. That's younger me there.
So this report goes on to say that I think what it does is it sends a message that everyone who is living on the coast has a choice not to live there. And so what Texas has done, and this is one particular report, and let me get over here to her, that I think is really good because it speaks to the reality of the workers that live near the coast that are working at refineries and working at the shipyards and working in the oil industry and so on. So this is Holly Hansen who's making this point. She's a Texan who is deeply concerned about the situation. So here's what she said.
You have industries along the coastline that are very important not only to the United States, but the entire world. And you need employees to work at those industries, petrochemical refineries and so forth. And so you're going to see a strong push to have those subsidized insurance policies. Mm-hmm. And hopefully they can improve those because there's a lot of complaints about the Texas windstorm.
So she goes on from there, but there's this wonderful and extremely important point about people who live on the coastline aren't rich people, while some are. The reality is, think about the number of employees, the largest employer in the state of Mississippi at Ingalls, and think about Chevron, and think about the hospitality sector, the tourism economy, and how important that is to us, or people who work at Stennis, or any of the ports that are along the coast of Mississippi. I mean, I could just continue on. And every coastal community has a similar thing like that to say. In North Carolina, this is what someone said, thanks to, and it gives some hashtags, catering to developer profits over people's lives and property. North Carolina has lost $70 million in FEMA funds, has weaker flood and wind protection, and higher insurance rates. Western and coastal North Carolina thank them at the ballot box. So you see these internal debates that are taking place in each of the states. You've got people who are concerned about climate change, but this particular point is if climate change were an existential threat, the world were ending in 8 years, a clause for that would be written into 30-year mortgages on oceanfront property. There isn't one. These properties would be too high, an inevitable risk for insurance companies to protect, and they aren't. I could go on. There's so much more to this. They're having challenges in California as a result of some regulatory actions that Gavin Newsom has taken. You've got in Canada headline. You heard what Frank said a few minutes ago about the damage they got from one of the hurricanes this year. But then a new study indicates that coastal flooding threatens almost 4 million Canadians. And they're once again in Canada, they're focused on this. Frank, I could go on and on and on about this. But having a conversation about the risk factors for coastal communities is often difficult when you can't all come to the conversation with an equal understanding of the kind of people that we're talking about. That, again, there may be some rich people, certainly, but the reality is it's mostly workers that are being impacted, and we can't seem to get the attention in the right places, can we?
No, this came up in an interview I did with NPR in 2012 when we were trying to fix Bickert Waters 2012. The radio host asked me, why are we subsidizing rich people in second homes? I encouraged that person to come to Mississippi, and I'll show them we have incentivized our national security along the coastline, whether it's oil and gas, or naval bases, or Air Force bases, or shipbuilders, or aviation contractors. We've incentivized that since the 70s, since the 60s and 70s. Those workers have to live here. Unfortunately, for a lot of these workers, and Senator Kennedy was spot on, if you go to Louisiana and you look at the people that were devastated flooding after Katrina, many of those people were extremely poor. A lot of our lower income people, unfortunately, live in flood zones. And so extremely disingenuous to lump.
It really is. And you think about in Louisiana, they had been hit repeatedly over the last few years, just a devastating situation. And so many of them work in the oil field and support the oil field in some way. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with insurance executive Frank Bordeaux. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. I have my friend Frank Bordeaux, who's an insurance executive. He's an insurance expert in Mississippi and someone that I enjoy catching up with because the notion of homeowner insurance and then business insurance on top of that is something that we talk about here in coastal Mississippi a lot. And based on what Frank is saying, we're going to be talking about it in inland areas of Mississippi as well. That's not a good trend, but that's the way the insurance community works. They take the latest information, they build it into their models, they look at how we're doing in terms of building codes and fortification, and they assess the risk, and here we go. So, Frank, is there anything else you want to share as it relates to sort of the current situation, the challenges that we face, before we kind of shift gears and move to what you learned while you were in London?
Beyond, we need to do a better job with building codes, especially north of the coast. I think the Mississippi Gulf Coast has done a very good job as it relates to that. I think that the fire truck program that the insurance commissioner has done in rural communities has been extremely successful. We need to continue to compound that because that is a risk that we don't think of very often, but the insurance community definitely does look at the fire ratings. Again, the Mississippi Gulf Coast has invested millions and millions of dollars making sure our fire ratings are some of the best in the state. And so we've got a lot of challenges ahead of us, but I do believe that as far as coastal Mississippi is concerned, we're doing a lot of really good things. And we are going to see a softening or a flattening of the market. One thing that was a huge challenge that we all forget to talk about was being exposed. The insurance industry, definitely the insured to value was an issue, and inflation was a massive issue. So it was a perfect storm of lack of capacity and then increasing your valuations. And so that has happened, and people have increased their valuation. So I think we're going to see a softening in that arena as well as softening rate.
Yeah, I mean, Ann and our building will soon start construction on a pool house, and man, the construction costs since we built our house in 2014 are literally more than double. more than double. And there's really very few signs. A lot of it's the trades are just charging more. Hopefully the building supplies, lumber costs and things like that. But you're right. I mean, in the wake of these hurricanes that, at least in the last couple of years, that have gone through Louisiana and, of course, up into America, couldn't have hit at a worse time in terms of the cost of supplies and rebuilding. That's a devastating entry point for this modeling, isn't it?
It was really devastating, and like I said, Ian truly exposed it. When you're looking at a building that may have a $30 million limit, and all of a sudden the storm comes through, the roof is gone, the building's still standing there, but if they max out their limits to rebuild that roof, obviously we have huge valuation issues. And so, but those have been corrected over the past couple of years. And so I think that we can kind of ease that increase of valuation every single year as much as we saw. And that was a big part of these huge increases we saw. We saw huge rate increases, huge deductible increases, but you also saw the valuation increase tremendously. And that's been very difficult for people in the homeowners arena as well as the commercial arena.
Yeah. Hey, you mentioned about the NPR interview in 2012 and, this perception about only rich people live on coastal communities. After Hurricane Katrina, it wasn't long. It was just a matter of months after Hurricane Katrina in Congress, in D.C., a senator from Delaware, somewhere in the Northeast, gave this very impassioned, like he was pounding his fist on the table, speech about how we need to solve this. We cannot subsidize rich people who live on the beach. And we actually did an editorial literally responding directly to that guy and trying to continue to set the record straight. We had to do this a lot after Hurricane Katrina, but set the record straight on who we're talking about and why that's important. We've got to get that stuff behind us. Now, the good news is most of the senators and representatives who are in the states that are more hurricane prone, there's no confusion in their minds about this at all. And I think when they work together, we can continue to set the record straight on that point. So one other thing before we get to the wind pool, I wanted just for people, not the wind pool, but the reinsurance information that you learned when you were in London. Tell us about the wind pool. For people who have not heard our conversations before, why it's so good that we have it and why it's healthy.
So we do have, I believe, the most conservative and the best funded wind pool in the United States. We've seen huge issues in Florida with their residual market, Texas with their residual market. Mississippi's we learned a lot of lessons after Hurricane Katrina, and we've been very steadfast in protecting our surplus that we receive every year, as well as buying reinsurance. And so we do buy a considerable amount of reinsurance. Because we've been conservative since Hurricane Katrina, now we're able to take more risk. So in a harder market, we've been able to assume more risk, and we can capitalize that risk. We're constantly looking at the different options as far as cat bonds and captives and other alternatives to insurance. But I will say, whether you're a private entity or a residual market, there is no silver bullet to fix this. There is no captive or cat bond that's going to come and create a situation where insurance pains are going to go away overnight. This is going to be a market-driven deal, and as you said, solutions on the backside, whether it's building codes and fortification, things of that nature. But the wind pool is extremely strong in Mississippi. We're actually seeing a depopulation for the first time in the last couple of years. It's a very modest depopulation, but that's a good sign that we have a healthy private market in Mississippi.
Well, when you talk about depopulation, just so people can understand, what had happened is a number of people who had to go to the wind pool because they couldn't get wind coverage or get coverage, where that number continued to increase. The fact that number may be going down again may suggest that more people are writing insurance, more comprehensive insurance, and that's a good trend.
It's a very good trend. It's very positive. A lot of other states are not seeing that. So it shows that we have a healthy market. in Mississippi. We do have carriers that are still writing. We haven't had the mass exodus or Louisiana and Florida had 13 plus carriers completely pull out or go bankrupt. We have not seen that in Mississippi. And I think that we're going to continue to see trends of carriers willing to give more capacity in Mississippi. The wind pool, whenever we're over trying to get reinsurance, we kind of pound our chest that we're the only insurance company that's going to meet with them that's trying to lose customers. And the only way to lose customers is to get a healthier private market. And so, but we're going in that direction. And so we're very proud that we hope that trend continues. We have increased the limits this next year. We're going to increase limits for smaller commercial properties. That's where we saw a huge pain point in the marketplace. And so we are the carrier last resort, but we do understand we have moral obligation to make sure that business owners are able to continue to do business, and insurance is a big part of that.
That's why we did the wind pool. I mean, that's why we had the wind pool, so we can sustain ourselves economically. Hey, listen, one other quick point. You mentioned Florida a couple of times. I've mentioned it a couple of times. One of the things I did is watch a podcast of some insurance executives and statewide insurance people who were discussing sort of what the situation is in Florida after Hurricane Milton. Now, they got lucky with Milton. It wasn't as bad as they expected it to be. But still, when you think about the cumulative effect of the hurricanes that have hit Florida, Florida's got a mega challenge in front of them, don't they?
They do. And, and they're a great example of there is no cat bond that can protect you. And all these alternatives that they've tried, and some of it is basically out of necessity. There was no capacity. I think you're going to continue to see issues over in Florida. But the one thing that I will say, as far as the coastline did very well in these storms, it was the issues that they had, some of the tornadoes and the inland flooding. And so any of these folks, Senator Paul, that thinks that this is for wealthy folks or just people who live on the beach, inland flooding is an issue, and it's showing itself in more states well north of the coast. And so we're going to continue to work towards mitigation. We're going to continue to raise our elevations as we construct on the coast. And so I think that FIP is going to be more of a necessity inland than what we've ever seen as well. And so I think our senators that think that this is just purely a coastal issue are short-sighted as far as that's concerned.
Well, that's why, when you and I had this really detailed conversation where we saw how many 90+% of counties in the U.S. that had some kind of catastrophic event, and it can be tornadoes, it can be fires, it can be earthquakes, it can be inland flooding from hurricanes. It can be a lot of different things. Hey, when we come back on the other side with Frank Bordeaux, we will find out what he learned in London and see what else he has to say about the current situation. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. We're talking about insurance today and have insurance executive Frank Bordeaux with us. Frank, you just got back from London. You gave us some sense of it. What else did you not say about what you learned while you were in London?
I will tell you that in 22 and 23, when I went to London prior to their reinsurance, because the insurance carriers, for the most part, signed their reinsurance treaties in January. Being there prior to that, last couple of years, it was like a morgue over there. Everybody was down in the dumps. Everybody was really concerned. A lot of folks that deal with catastrophic, whether it's wind or flood, on the U.S. coast, they're extremely optimistic. They felt like they did perform very well. The models performed pretty well. And where they didn't perform well, the claims were a lot less than what they expected. Obviously, we dodged a huge bullet with Milton. The U.S. market dodged a huge bullet. What that could have been a 5 going into, Florida would have been a disaster.
Anything, and then north of Tampa Bay. How close did that come? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, a 5 hit in Tampa Bay is a whole lot different story than a 1 hit in Sarasota.
Yeah.
And so, the insurance market performed well. I think they are going to have good returns this year. And I think you're going to see that in additional capacity, but I also think you're going to see it in rate decreases. Now, that's going to be commercial properties will lead the way. Commercial properties took the hit in the beginning, then we saw residential. I think we're going to see commercial properties, especially best of class, good construction. And they continuously bring up Zeta and how we performed in Zeta, and how Zeta was a much bigger storm than what anybody anticipated. It wasn't a 1, it was a 3, although it's fast moving. And we performed extremely well as a state, less than $50 million in insured losses. And a 3 hits anywhere on the Gulf Coast, you're going to expect much more. And so I think they're taking note of that. I think that Mississippi is going to see some capacity that may lead Florida or Louisiana come into our market, new capacity. And so I'm very optimistic from a commercial standpoint. We just hope that the residential standpoint comes behind that. I will say it's amazing, and I've said this multiple times, it's amazing how in tune to Mississippi politics and Mississippi codes that each one of these syndicates are. They know our risk so well. Whether it's London or our domestic carriers, they understand what's going on, and they understand the investment that citizens have made as far as these building codes are concerned. But to your point earlier, a mitigation program and a fortified mitigation program will take us to a whole nother level, quite frankly. It will, and it's extremely important. The next time you're on, we need to do a complete conversation about the National Flood Insurance Program, Risk Rating 2.0. I have described it as we're in boiling water. I mean, we're a frog in water that's coming to a boil because of the way they're doing these annual increases, getting to these target numbers. People don't necessarily feel it at one time, but you hear the story that I mentioned, the one that was in the Sun Herald, where I think they blamed the mortgage company, but at the end of the day, their premium did get paid. So since they were grandfathered initially, since they stopped, then they immediately went back to the target rate, and I don't remember how much it was, but it was an incredible increase. That's where we're all headed. And if we don't find some way to spread that risk, we're all in trouble in the next 10 years. What's the next step on that? So, like you said, I mean, the issue with a single peril policy is those that need it are more susceptible to loss. If we had those more spread of risk inland, I think we could see a softening of the premiums. But there is no easy actuarial option for this. This has to be something that's subsidized. It started off as a subsidized program to encourage growth and to be able to build on our coastline. And then to pull that away is pretty difficult for all of us that have invested lots of money and time here. The distance to water, that change of calculation has been devastating. And I think that you're going to see an effort to kind of roll back the risk meter 2.0. I know the industry is pushing hard for it. I know that there's several, obviously, Congressman Scalise and our representatives, Congressman Ezel, they get it, they understand it. And so I think there's going to be some relief. One thing that I will say, Senator Cochran and Congressman Scalise, they're requiring the NFIP to start buying reinsurance was a great move forward. They never bought reinsurance prior to that. I believe if they treated the flood program similar to how we treat the wind pool program in Mississippi, I think that there'd be a whole lot more that we could do. We can lay a lot of our risk in reinsurance, and we can also take any reserves that we have from year to year. And we do have years where we have reserves. If Congress wouldn't take that money and they'd let it build, we could be able to retain some of the risk. So I think there's going to be some hard decisions that are going to have to be made.
Well, I hope that eventually we can have a conversation about spreading risk to catastrophic coverage, which, as you pointed out, insurance companies didn't necessarily support before, but might be more open to that conversation now. So that's all moving in the right direction. Listen, Frank, it's been a pleasure to spend some time with you, my friend.
Thank you very much, Ricky.
And you bet. This has been Frank Bordeaux. Hope you got some interesting information about insurance in Mississippi. Great conversation. Listen, have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.